What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Today we're building Geralf the Fleshwright, and I'll be honest, it took me a couple different builds to land on what I have today, but I think we ended up with something pretty broken and pretty unique at the same time. So if you guys want a free $15, you can click on that whatnot link in the description down below. Patrons, I appreciate all that you do, and audience, if you would like, comment, and subscribe to help out the channel, I would really appreciate it. Now let's get into this deck tech. First off, we have a 3 CMC commander in mono blue, and he says whenever you cast a spell, as long as it's not the first spell we cast this turn, we get a 2/2 zombie, and then you get to put a 1/1 counter on that zombie for each other zombie that's entered the battlefield this turn. So it's kind of like a storm deck where you're creating zombies that get bigger and bigger, right? Sign me up. Now I didn't fall into the pitfall that I think is zombie tribal with this deck, because I don't think that's a very powerful route to take, and I think it's going to lead you into a bunch of very expensive zombies. You're probably casting one zombie per turn. It just doesn't fit the theme of the deck or maybe it fits the theme, but it doesn't work with the commander very much, if that makes sense. Then I went directly into cantrips, which honestly, the deck worked, but it didn't feel unique, right? It just felt like mono blue cantrips. It did the thing, but it was kind of boring, so I scrapped that idea, and then I ended up with tap abilities. Now, how did I end up here? And the answer to that is kind of just one card, Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I realized that if we're able to discard some broken cards like, I don't know, Glenalindra Archmage, or cards that allow us to draw 3 cards just by tapping them, and then we go ahead and exile them with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, we're able to turn our massive board of zombies into very broken zombies with insane tap abilities. There's even creatures that allow you just to tap a creature and then steal a creature. Not okay, and we're looking to do that. So what I did to make this happen is I included a lot of mana rocks that tap for a lot of mana. That way we can include your Fate Stitcher effects to untap those mana rocks. Because again, we're not going the cantrip route, which means we need mana, right? We need to be casting several spells a turn. That has not changed, but whenever we're not spending only 1 mana for the majority of our spells, we're gonna need a lot of mana, and if there's one thing this deck does, it's produce a ton of mana. Additionally, we can use things like Ashnod's Altar to straight up sacrifice our zombies. We are going to use that sparingly though, because we need our massive board of zombies to tap for those broken abilities. And the last thing we're going to include is a ton of looters, and again, just more broken tap abilities. Again, this is a pretty unique deck. I kind of like what we ended up with, so if this sounds like an interesting deck, let's get into it. The first thing I want to do is double up on those zombies, so the easiest way to do that is to just double up on our commander. Roaming Throne does it without doing that, but stuff like Vile Duplication and Quantum Misalignment are going to net us another copy of our commander. Quantum Misalignment even nets us 2 copies of our commander, so these are going to make it to where we're generating double the amount of zombies, double the amount of counters. It's going to make a massive board state very quickly. Moving along, let's talk about those tap abilities that we're trying to exile with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. The first tap abilities we're going to talk about is our looter effects. Thought Courier, Seeker of Insight, Merfolk Looter, and Kista Otterball Elite. I like Kista here as well because if we get her power large enough, we're able to actually copy our instant and sorcery spells. From there we have Cephalid Broker. This is going to be a looter on steroids. Now we're drawing 2 cards and discarding 2 cards just instead of 1. Jace's Archivist, kind of insane here as well. This is just a wheel effect tacked onto a creature. When all of our zombies are wheel effects, that's going to be pretty crazy, and we're going to have access to all of the cards in our library pretty much. From there, I want to talk about Unctus. This guy just straight up gives all of our blue creatures the ability, whenever this creature becomes tapped, draw a card and discard a card. So now whenever we're either attacking with our zombies or tapping them for value, we get that looter effect, which is exactly what we want. That way we can find our Soul Cauldron as fast as possible. But let's talk about some of the more fun abilities we have in the deck. We have Zurgon Infiltrator. This guy allows us to tap a creature, put a stun counter on it, and then he becomes a copy of that creature. If we have this guy under Agatha's Soul Cauldron, now all of our zombies with 1/1 counters on them can be any copy of any creature on the board. That's just going to be wild. Arcanus was a no-brainer here. Now all of our zombies with 1/1 counters on them tap and draw 3 cards. Beguiler of Wheels just says gain control of target creature with power less than or equal to the number of creatures you control. So now we're just tapping our zombies and stealing our opponent's board state. We are running Crashing Drawbridge as well. With all of these tap abilities, haste is super useful, so we're going to be running that. And from there, we're running creatures that untap target permanents. Vizier of Tumbling Sands, very good here because we can actually cycle this, get it in the graveyard. That way we can instantly exile it to our Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Kelpie Guide, pretty solid here, just untap target permanent. And then Loreth. There's some broken things we can do with Loreth, but I'll leave that for later on in the video. And then Fate Stitcher. Not only is this guy a zombie, he fits with exactly what we are trying to do. I will go over what these guys are actually going to untap to ensure that this deck is working, but for now, it's just important that you know they exist. We're also going to run Intruder Alarm because we're probably terrible people. This is going to untap all of our creatures whenever one of our zombies enters the battlefield. That means as long as these creatures are able to untap our mana rocks, we can kind of just cast our entire library with enough of the key pieces on the board. Let's talk about what those untappers are going to be untapping to ensure that we're able to keep casting cards and keep generating these zombie tokens. Nyx Lotus and Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, these are all going to tap to mana equal to the amount of our devotion to blue, right? So now, as long as we have a bunch of blue creatures on the battlefield, we tap these for a decent amount of mana and we're able to cast more spells. Then we just go ahead and untap them, that way we can cast even more spells, and so on and so on. Scepter of Eternal Glory, we have Throne of Eldraine, Gilded Lotus, just solid mana rocks that tap for 3 mana. Actually, Throne of Eldraine is going to go ahead and tap for 4 mana, so that's going to be insane. Not to mention, it does provide us card advantage. We're also on Lotus Field and Lotus Veil. These are going to be solid lands that tap for 3 mana. Whenever we're untapping one thing at a time, we want to be untapping the most efficient thing, so lands that tapped for 3 mana seem to like a no-brainer. Now, let's go over that broken interaction I was talking about with Loreth, and there's a couple different ways this can work, so bear with me. The first thing we need is obviously legendary permanents that tap for mana. So your Nyx Lotus, your Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx, Scepter of Eternal Glory, Throne of Eldraine, there's a ton in this deck. Then you want your One Ring to draw you more cards, that way you're able to cast more cards. From there, we need to have Loreth exiled under Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Now, whenever we cast a spell, we're generating more zombies. This means we get a fresh creature on the battlefield that is ready to be tapped. The only thing we need from there is a haste enabler like our Lightning Greaves or our Swiftfoot Boots. Another way this can work is just having Loreth on the battlefield with Intruder Alarm. Now, every time one of those zombies enters the battlefield, it untaps Loreth, and we're ready to untap our One Ring and mana producer of choice. This entire deck is just a giant Rube Goldberg machine. Other notable things this deck is capable of, we are on the Reality Chip and Sensei's Divining Top. This allows us to go ahead and go infinite if we have something like a Phyrexian Arena or a Phyrexian Altar on the battlefield, because we're able to sacrifice those zombies that we're creating off of our commander to generate mana. That way we're able to pay for the Sensei's Divining Top, and then the Sensei's Divining Top just goes back on top of the library, and the Reality Chip allows us to cast that. Now, even without infinite mana, just the fact that we can cast the top several different times a turn, that's going to allow us to generate a massive board state of zombies very quickly. Another thing that I like about Sensei's Divining Top here is even without the Reality Chip, that's just going to give you a consistent spell we can cast every single turn to generate value to ensure that we're creating those zombies that we need for this strategy to work. Danny Pink, Jason Bright, and Kindred Discovery. These are all going to draw us a card whenever we cast a spell, as long as it's our second spell, right? Because now when that zombie enters the battlefield and gets the counter put on it, Danny Pink's going to trigger. Whenever we generate a zombie, Kindred Discovery is going to trigger, and then whenever we sacrifice that zombie with Ashnod's Altar or Phyrexian Altar, Jason Bright's going to trigger and get us card advantage. This is another way we can kind of storm off without all of the other untapping shenanigans. If we get an Ashnod's Altar or Phyrexian Altar on the battlefield with any of these card draw engines, you guessed it, we've built our second Rube Goldberg machine. Last but not least, this deck can win through straight up combat damage. That's another reason that I have Crashing Drawbridge in the deck. If we're able to generate enough zombies, these zombies get massive fast, especially when we have multiple copies of our commander, because we're not only doubling the amount of zombies we're creating, we're also doubling the counters we're putting on them. And then you start to realize lethal combat damage is a real option here. So I am going to include Walk of Aeons. Now, I understand this is probably going to be a salt-inducing card because it has buyback and we can get more and more extra turns equal to the amount of islands we control, because we just sacrificed 3 islands to bring this back. But also, it's a monocolored deck, so I am going to go ahead and make an exception for this. It's something that you can't really run with any other colors, so I think it's kind of unique to mono blue. And let's be honest, this is better than including something like Harbinger of Seas or Back to Basics. That's going to do it for the deck tech, guys. Shout out to my high contributing patrons, Irrelevant, Praetor, The Professional Heel, Chicken Salad, and Excessum. You guys are amazing. I hope this helped you guys in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you in the next one.